Jasmine Moretti had never felt like her life belonged to her. Though raised in a grand villa overlooking the Sapphire Bay, with expensive dresses, rare books, and a polished piano at the heart of the living room, she had always been a stranger in the very place she called home. Mrs. Moretti often said adopting her had been a humanitarian gesture, but Jasmine had never felt any kindness in the woman's eyes, cold, distant, always as if peering through a pane of thick glass. They had never called her daughter, just Jasmine, just the girl they raised. Her childhood was shaped by long, silent dinners with crisp white linens, the cold clinking of silverware, and conversations she was never invited to join. Jasmine learned how to be quiet, how not to ask too much, how not to hope too far. The only thing she had ever dared to wish for was a simple love, a person who would look into her eyes and truly see her, not her status, not her debt, not her appearance. But even that had been denied her. At dusk one evening, Mrs. Moretti summoned her to the study, a room where decisions were handed down like sentences. On the desk sat a steaming cup of tea and an already opened letter. "You'll marry Luca?" she said, her voice void of softness. Jasmine blinked, sure she had misheard. "Luca, the gardener? Yes." There was no hesitation. "He needs a family. You need a title." "That's enough. I don't love him." Mrs. Moretti set her teacup down with a soft clink, her eyes brooking no argument. "Jasmine, you don't have many choices. This family has given you everything." The words cut deep into the fragile dream Jasmine had built for herself. She had thought at the very least, love would be hers to choose. But it turned out nothing truly belonged to her, not even her own heart. The wedding was held quietly in the garden. No grand white gown, no genuine laughter, just Jasmine in a pale ivory dress, standing beside a man she barely knew. Luca Bellini, the quiet gardener with sun-worn hands and eyes that always looked away, was now her husband. When the guests had all gone, Jasmine stood alone by the lavender hedge. No one congratulated her. No one held her tight and told her everything would be okay. Only the sea breeze brushed through her hair, carrying the scent of salt and a hollowness that stretched on and on. Even in her worst dreams, Jasmine had never imagined marriage could begin with such a dry, aching silence. After the wedding, she and Luca moved into a small house tucked away from the Moretti villa, nestled at the edge of the garden where lavender and old olive trees swayed in the sea breeze. And yet, Jasmine felt like she was living with a ghost. A man who didn't look at her, didn't touch her, didn't seem to exist emotionally in her world. She felt humiliated, not because of the simplicity of this new life, but because she had been given away like a worn possession. No flowing white gown, no friends to celebrate, not a single look of love. Luca wasn't unkind, but it was his gentle detachment that made her feel invisible. He rose before dawn each morning to tend the garden, pouring himself into the earth as if it mattered more than anything else. In the evenings, he joined her for dinner without looking up more than a few times. Afterward, he cleaned the table, washed the dishes, then disappeared, sometimes into the woodshed, sometimes into the night air. Jasmine had tried to make conversation. She asked about his favorite flowers, if he preferred the countryside over the city. His answers were soft, never rude, but always short, always just enough to end the moment. She had cried alone more than once when the silence became too heavy. Stood in front of the mirror and whispered, "Why me?" And then, slowly, the little things began to show themselves. In the early morning, she found tea already steeped, steam curling from the cup, a jar of honey placed nearby, her mug waiting at her usual seat. One rainy afternoon, she discovered a pair of boots and a coat set by the door, prepared, even though Luca had said nothing. One night, burning with fever, she woke to feel a cool cloth on her forehead. Through half-lidded eyes, she saw Luca seated beside her, head nodding from exhaustion. When she stirred, he straightened. No complaint, no scolding, just a whisper, "Do you need anything?" That word "you" was as soft as air, but it struck something deep inside her. The next day, Luca was quiet again. He never mentioned the night. But Jasmine couldn't forget. She began to watch him more closely, the way he patiently weeded around the tomato beds, how he wiped dew from the petals of each flower like they were made of glass. One morning, as sunlight poured through the kitchen, she noticed the handkerchief she had dropped days before, now clean, folded, placed beside her cup. Luca never said he cared, but his actions spoke with a language far louder than words. Jasmine felt her heart begin to waver, not because she suddenly loved him, but because she was no longer certain that he didn't care. Maybe he did, in his own quiet way. That evening, as they sat across from each other at dinner, she said softly, "The hydrangeas bloomed today." Luca paused mid-bite and gave her a faint smile, the first one she had ever seen. "I noticed." They fell silent again, but this time the silence didn't feel empty. Jasmine realized that between two strangers, sometimes all it took was one sincere moment, and the distance began to shrink. Jasmine walked briskly along the narrow dirt path that led from the cottage to the Moretti estate. The night was darker than she'd expected. No street lamps, only scattered moonlight cutting through the leaves and the whisper of wind like voices, saying things she couldn't quite catch. She didn't usually walk alone this late, but tonight, after another strained conversation with Mrs. Moretti, she needed silence, some space to breathe. At first, she didn't notice the footsteps behind her. Then she realized they weren't her own echoes. They were steady, heavy, and close. Her heart thudded harder. Jasmine stopped, pretending to check her shoelace. The footsteps stopped too. She looked around. Only shadows, but the air felt thick, as if someone was holding their breath nearby. She tried to stay calm and walked again, faster this time. The footsteps returned, quicker, urgent. No doubt now, someone was following her. She broke into a run. Her breath quickened, her pulse pounding in her throat. She veered off the main path toward the woods, praying she could lose whoever it was. The darkness swallowed her. She slipped, nearly falling. A noise behind her. A panting breath. So close. And then, "Stop right there." The voice rang out, strong, commanding. Both Jasmine and her pursuer froze. From the shadows, Luca stepped forward. His eyes gleamed under the moonlight, his face tense, fists clenched. He positioned himself between Jasmine and the stranger, a solid wall of protection. "Leave. Now." His voice was low, not shouting, but carried weight enough to shake the trees. The man hesitated, just for a second, then turned and ran into the woods. Jasmine remained frozen, her whole body trembling with adrenaline and fear. Luca turned to her, his expression softening the moment he saw her. "Are you okay?" She shook her head, eyes wet with tears. She didn't want to cry, but the tension inside her was too much. Without another word, Luca stepped forward and pulled her into his arms. She didn't resist. She didn't know when she'd started needing that embrace. He held her like nothing else mattered, firmly, steadily, not too tight. She leaned into his chest, listening to the beat of his heart. Strong, calm, grounding. Telling her it was over. That she was safe now. Not with words, but with presence. For the first time, safety didn't come from walls. It came from someone. "I thought," she whispered, voice shaking. "I know," he said gently, his lips near her hair. "I won't let that happen." They stood like that in the forest, beneath the moonlight. Two people who had once been strangers, now bound by a night neither would forget. When Jasmine finally looked up, their eyes met, and this time there was no awkwardness. There was warmth and something real. After that night, Jasmine began to see Luca differently. He was no longer the silent man who shared her house, no longer just the gardener she had been forced to marry. He was the man who stepped out of the shadows to protect her without asking for anything in return. Luca never brought up what had happened. He didn't ask how she felt. He didn't try to force closeness. But every morning, tea was ready. Every evening, the doors were checked. And whenever their eyes accidentally met, he gave her a smile, gentle, subtle, meant only for her. Jasmine began to wait for those moments. She found herself listening for his footsteps in the early hours. She no longer startled at his shadow on the porch, but felt safer when it was there. Some nights they sat on the front step, saying nothing. She read, he carved wood. The silence between them had changed. It was no longer cold. It was the silence of familiarity, the kind that didn't need words to be understood. One afternoon, as Jasmine walked through the garden, she noticed a new patch of soil freshly turned, full of lilacs, the flower she had once mentioned, barely above a whisper over breakfast. She stood there for a long moment. When Luca passed by, she asked softly, "You planted them?" "Yes," he replied. "They suit the season." No declarations, no hidden meaning, but her heart thundered in her chest. That night, she couldn't sleep. She thought of his hands, rough, sun-darkened yet impossibly gentle with each plant. She thought of how he quietly placed an extra blanket in her closet, just because she'd once mentioned being cold at night. And she realized she had started to want him nearer, not because she was supposed to, but because she felt something missing when he wasn't. What she felt wasn't overwhelming, it wasn't dramatic, but it soaked into her like night mist into earth, quiet, lasting. One evening, as they ate in their usual silence, Jasmine suddenly said, "You never ask me anything." Luca looked up, slightly caught off guard. "What should I ask?" She shook her head, then smiled faintly. "I don't know, but I think I want you to know who I am." He set his spoon down and looked at her, longer than usual. "I've always wanted to," he said slowly, "but I was afraid if I got too close, you'd pull away." Jasmine was stunned. She hadn't expected his words to cut so deep. They didn't speak again after that, but when Luca stood to clear the table, he gently brushed her hand, and for the first time, Jasmine didn't pull away. That afternoon, the air was crisp, the sky clear as if everything was peaceful. Jasmine returned home earlier than usual after finishing her teaching. She planned to stop by the market for bread and a few sprigs of rosemary, but as she neared the gate, she froze. A sleek, black car sat parked in the driveway, one she didn't recognize. Her steps slowed. Through the garden fence, she saw Luca, speaking with a sharply dressed man in a tailored suit, polished shoes, and an expression that didn't quite welcome. They didn't notice her watching. The man handed Luca what looked like documents, a contract perhaps, and said something too quiet for Jasmine to hear. After a moment, the man turned and left, leaving Luca standing alone under the golden afternoon light. Jasmine opened the gate. Luca turned at the creak. His expression flickered, only briefly, before it returned to calm. "Who was that?" Jasmine asked, her tone soft but edged with unease. "Just someone from the past. The kind that shows up in luxury cars? Luca, don't lie to me." He hesitated. She saw it in his eyes, not guilt, but conflict. At last he stepped forward. "There's something you should know." Her heart pounded. "I'm not just a gardener. I never was." Time stilled. "I was born into a wealthy family. Real estate, one of the largest firms in the region. I'm the heir, the current CEO. Jasmine stared. "So, all of this, was it fake?" "No," Luca said quickly. "What's between us is real, but the rest, yes, I didn't tell you." "Why?" Luca lowered his gaze for a moment, then met hers. "Because my entire life, I've been seen as a name, a title, a figure. When I agreed to this marriage, I didn't want to be judged for my status. I wanted to be seen for who I truly am. And you thought deceiving me would achieve that? I thought you were the only one who wouldn't need the surface. I believed you'd see deeper. But I should have trusted you enough to tell you sooner." Jasmine swallowed hard. Half of her wanted to believe him. The other half felt betrayed. "You didn't think I deserved to know the truth from the start? I was afraid you'd see me like everyone else. I was afraid I'd ruin something real before it had a chance to grow." She looked away, blinking back tears. I thought I understood you. I believed in every small gesture, every quiet moment. And I still do." She turned back, eyes confused. "But now, I don't know who I've fallen for. The gardener who planted flowers for me, or the CEO in expensive suits?" Luca didn't flinch. "I'm both. I'm still the one who made tea, stayed up when you were sick. I never used what I had to make you love me." He stepped closer. "I only hoped you could love the real me, even if I'm layered." The silence between them wasn't distance. It was a question. Is there enough trust to move forward? Jasmine reached for his hand. "You want me to believe I was chosen, not assigned?" Luca nodded, eyes heavy with hope. "You're the only one who's ever seen me. Not my title, not my wealth." She pulled her hand back, paused, then stepped closer. "I never wanted what you have. I wanted the man who made porridge when I couldn't move, the man who left tea by the window. I love that man." Luca's voice cracked. "That's me, from the beginning." Jasmine nodded. Then this time, no more secrets. They stood in the garden as a breeze passed between them. Nothing more needed to be said. Because in that moment they knew, real love doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be true. And brave enough to be seen. 2 days had passed since the conversation filled with tears and truth. Jasmine woke up feeling empty but strangely lighter. The shadows had been brought into the light. Still painful, yes, but at least no longer hidden. Luca had been quieter than usual. But in that quiet, his gestures grew gentler. He made her tea exactly the way she liked it, with a thin slice of lemon. He didn't try to explain away the past, didn't rush to fix things. He simply stayed, fully present, moment by moment. At evening, as dusk settled over the rose garden behind their home, Luca found Jasmine standing near the white rose bushes. She brushed a petal with her fingers, her face soft in thought. He walked toward her. "Do you like them?" She nodded without turning. "I've always liked white flowers, pure but fragile. I planted them for you," Lucas said gently. "Each one." Jasmine tilted her head slightly. "I know." From his pocket, Luca pulled out a small velvet box. His heart thudded so loudly he could barely hear anything else. "I don't know how to say this perfectly," he began, voice rough with emotion. "But I do know one thing. I don't want you to be my wife only because of a contract. I want you to be the woman I chose, and if possible, the one who chooses me back." Jasmine turned, eyes widening as she saw the ring in his hand. It was delicate, understated, yet it caught the fading light like a quiet flame. "We're already married, on paper," Luca continued. "But I want to ask you, let's start over, from the heart, with real love." He knelt down, his hand trembling. "Jasmine, would you choose me again? This time not because you were told to, but because you want to?" Jasmine didn't answer right away. Her heart swelled with emotion, shock, gratitude, and something deeper she hadn't yet named. Finally, she stepped forward, leaned down, placed her hand over his, the one holding the ring. "Luca," she whispered, voice catching, "I've been choosing you for a long time. I just didn't realize it." She nodded slowly, eyes glistening in the fading sunlight. "And this time, I choose you with all my heart." And as Jasmine wore the ring Luca gave her, not out of duty, not for tradition, but for love, she thought the hardest part was behind them. But the past has a way of finding its way back, especially when it wears the face of a familiar gait and a name she had never truly escaped. Moretti. The invitation from the Moretti estate arrived in a firm envelope, sealed with red wax. Jasmine held it for a long time. It was for a formal gathering, one attended by the most powerful people in the region, many of whom had once seen her as nothing more than a charity case, a party sent, not out of warmth, but tradition and control. Though she now lived elsewhere, though she was someone's wife, the name Moretti still tightened something in her chest. Lucas sat across from her in the kitchen. When he saw her eyes dim, he asked simply, "We have to go, don't we?" She nodded, silent. He stood, walked over, and took her hand, a small gesture that soothed her heart. Then we'll go, but this time, you won't walk in there alone." That day, the Moretti villa gleamed under the late sun. Luxury cars lined the entrance, the wrought iron gate opening like a barrier between two worlds. Jasmine stepped out of the car, her slate grey gown brushing the marble path. She paused just before the entrance until Luca gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "Look at me if you get nervous. I won't let anyone here make you question your worth." She looked at him, and for the first time, she believed. They stepped into the great hall. The air was cold, voices sharp, glances sharper. Whispered judgment rolled through the room like a current. "Is that Jasmine? She's still with him? Heard he's just the gardener." Jasmine hesitated, but Luca never let go. Mrs. Moretti appeared near the grand staircase, draped in dark silk, her gaze piercing. "You've returned," she said, "and brought your husband." Her voice carried across the room. Luca stepped forward, still holding Jasmine's hand. "Not just her husband," he said, voice calm but clear. "I'm the man who chose Jasmine, not for her name, not for her status, but for her heart. And I won't let anyone here make her doubt it." The room fell silent. Jasmine felt his hand, solid, unwavering in hers. A few heads bowed, some nodded, murmuring. But she no longer cared about the looks around them. She had seen a man stand for her. Not out of obligation or show, but out of something real. That night, after the guests had left, Jasmine and Luca stood on the veranda. Moonlight spilled across the familiar stone, the place of many old memories, now the setting for something new. "You truly surprised me," she whispered. Luca smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I don't need to be anyone else in front of them. As long as you know who I am, that's enough." It was late when Jasmine and Luca returned home. Neither of them spoke during the drive, but the silence wasn't awkward or strained. It was the quiet of two people who had just walked through a storm, not with enemies, but with their own pasts. When the car pulled up to their small house, Jasmine didn't get out right away. She stared at the garden where the lilacs swayed gently under the thin moonlight. "I used to think I'd never truly belong anywhere," she whispered. Luca turned to her, his gaze soft. "And now?" Jasmine took a deep breath. "Now, I think, I've found that place. Not in that big estate, not in how others see me, but here, with you." Luca didn't reply. He only gave her hand a gentle squeeze. That familiar gesture, once uncertain, was now the most comforting thing in the world. They stepped inside. No roses on the floor, no music playing. Just the faint scent of warm tea, a folded blanket, and the kitchen light casting golden warmth across the wooden floor. Their love had never been loud. It had grown from kindness, from waiting glances, from a hand that never let go, even in silence. Luca sat down and gently pulled Jasmine closer. "Thank you," he said, "for not just forgiving me, but for choosing me, again and again." Jasmine leaned in, pressing her forehead to his. "You chose me too, when no one else ever really did." In that moment, they were no longer two people forced into a marriage. They were two souls who had learned to love not because they were supposed to, but because they wanted to. Not because they were told to, but because they had seen each other clearly and still chose each other. That spring came late. Snow melted slowly, and the sun stayed hidden behind shy gray clouds. But in the small cottage nestled among quiet hills, the light had returned long before, not from the sky, but from within. Life after their second wedding, the one without silk gowns or noble guests, moved quietly, yet completely. Jasmine continued her teaching job at the village school. She rose early, brewed tea, brushed her hair in front of the old wooden mirror. Luca fixed the roof, tended the garden, and picked her up every evening, always holding a bunch of wild daisies or a sprig of lavender. They didn't talk much, but each look they shared felt like the first. Simple dinners, pumpkin soup, toasted bread, became moments where their entire world found home. One evening, as Jasmine folded blankets on the porch, a breeze of early spring passed through. She paused, her hand resting gently on her stomach. Still flat, but warmer somehow. She hadn't told Luca yet. She wanted to be sure. A few days later, she took his hand and placed it over her belly. "Do you hear anything?" Luca frowned in curiosity, then looked up, and in his eyes, a universe bloomed. "You," Jasmine nodded, tears gathering. "We're having a baby." Luca held her hand tight, saying nothing, but Jasmine felt the tremor in his chest. A joy not loud or dramatic, but so deep it echoed through every breath. They stood like that, under the fading light of the day, hand in hand, smiling like children who had touched something sacred for the very first time. Jasmine knew there would be challenges ahead, but she wasn't afraid, because now she wasn't just chosen. She was loved, trusted, shared with Ophis. And the child growing inside her, the quiet proof of two broken hearts that had dared to heal, was the most beautiful evidence of it all. Happiness didn't always arrive with loud fanfare or bright bouquets. Sometimes it came in silent evenings, in the heartbeat of someone not yet born, in a glance that tells you you're exactly where you belong.